Welcome, wine lovers, to Sip Sip Hooray. We're the podcast that brings you delicious conversations about wine and the fascinating people making it. On the podcast today, a wine friend so busy, we can't believe she's made time to visit us again. She is managing director of one of the best-known names in wine and is admired around the world, not only for the incredible wines that her family produces, but also for her stewardship of the land and efforts to make wine production more ecologically sustainable, as well as her tireless work to champion and preserve old vines and genetic diversity in wine. She is a fourth-generation Argentine vintner whose winery was recently named the world's best vineyard. On top of all that, she is also a physician, formerly an emergency room doctor in San Francisco. Dr. Laura Catena is a force of nature and as nice as they come. It is such a pleasure to welcome her back to the podcast today to talk about Malbec, the future of healthy wine consumption, and what wineries can do to take care of people and the planet. We are the two Marys who like to eat, drink, and be merry. I'm Mary Babbitt.
I'm Mary Orlin. Laura Catena was on our pod in October 2020. She had just written the book, Gold in the Vineyards, and that episode remains our number one episode to this day. We'll link to it in our show notes on Sip Sip Hooray podcast. It's definitely worth a listen. Since then, Laura has been busy. What does it take to be named the world's best vineyard to visit? Laura will give us the behind the scenes and insight on her family's Catena Zapata winery in Mendoza, Argentina, earned this honor in 2023. And Laura happens to be speaking to us today from Mendoza. In 2021, Laura wrote another book along with the Catena Zapata winemaker Alejandro Vigil, Malbec Mon Amour, and we will explore this fun, engaging, and colorful book with her. Laura and Catena Zapata's team are also working on addressing and adapting to climate change, and one major initiative of making their bottles lighter, reducing the winery's carbon footprint around the world. On top of all that, Laura continues the work on Malbec research through the Catena Institute of Wine, which she founded. And in light of the many recent warnings about alcohol and health, Laura is offering a more balanced point of view, and we'll certainly get into that. So pour a glass of Malbec. Let's welcome Laura Catena back to Sip Sip Hooray.
Hello. How are you guys?
We're great. How are you?
I'm great. I'm here towards the end of the harvest in Mendoza. It's been a good one, and it's just beautiful here. It's starting to get a little cool.
Well, we are so thrilled that you've come back to the podcast, and there's so much more to talk about since we last spoke. I'm a big fan, Laura, so I'm really thrilled that you're here with us today. You know, when I think about your history in going back to 1902 and your great-grandfather coming to Argentina from Italy, so it's such a deep history in wine, but also the fact that you're leaning and really working hard to lead Catena Zapata into the future and make it a more sustainable future for yourselves and others. As I said, there's so much to talk about, but maybe it'd be smart of us to have you give us a little quick backstory on Catena Zapata.
Yeah, well, it all starts with my great-grandfather, Nicola Catena, comes from Italy to Argentina and plants his first vines of Malbec in 1902. And then my grandfather continues the family tradition, then my father. And my father's really the pioneer of the family in establishing the Argentine category in the world. Before my father started exporting Malbec, there was no Malbec being exported at the high end. And my dad has this brilliant idea, which is, I'm not just going to sell wine. I am going to follow in Mondavi's footprints and make Argentine wines that can stand with the best of the world. And, today we have this award of world's best vineyard. We have more 100-point wines than any other winery in South America. But, it has not been an easy journey. As you know, Argentina is a beautiful country with lots of natural resources, amazing people, but we've gone through 1,000% inflation. Right now, inflation is over 200%. We've had military governments, all kinds of things, and our family has survived for 120 years. And the last thing, and most importantly, my father could have had all the dreams in the world, and that's where I came along to really make this dream come true of making Argentine wines that can stand with the best of the world. And where I fit in is in a lot of the research. I'm a biologist, I'm a medical doctor, but really none of these dreams could be possible if we didn't have this incredible terroir. And terroir means the taste of place. And, if you wanted to make a great wine in a really rainy place that has really fertile soils and is too hot, you would not make a great wine. So wine, viticulture really thrives for wine in specific places. And Mendoza is just paradise. We have the Andes mountains, we have the altitude, sunlight, not too rainy, well-drained soils. And well-drained is really important because you don't want high yields from the vineyards. You want, kind of smallish yields. You want ripe grapes, but not too ripe, so you don't get too much alcohol. It's got to ripen slowly, so you get these beautiful, fruity, all those incredible aromas that we love about wine. Then you need the good acidity. For that, it can't be too hot. But then if it's too cold, the vine has to be buried, which causes a lot of vine loss. So really, we have this magical place. So I like to say that, our family has had many very hardworking people of our family and all the people working at Catena, but that we've also gotten very lucky to be making wine in Mendoza, right by the Andes Mountains.
Well, Laura, that leads me to my question, and the being named #1 vineyard in the world by the 50 best vineyards to visit. And I have been there. I had the good pleasure of almost a decade ago visiting Catena Zapata, the winery, the vineyards, and it's absolutely breathtaking. But set the scene for our listeners and talk about what it takes to earn the honor of being the world's best vineyard.
Yes, first I want to say that I was the most surprised person in the room when they announced it. I had no idea. They invited me to Spain, which I almost didn't go because I had to do something else. But then I said, you know what, these really nice people with this very important award, they're the same people as the 50 best restaurants, which is literally today in the category of Michelin stars. Being in the 50 best restaurants is the same as getting 3 Michelin stars. So I thought, okay, if these really important people have invited me and they said, they basically said, you might get something. I said, okay, I'll go. I had no idea we were going to get the #1. So I go to this event, and this award is given to a winery of international recognition that has extraordinary wines, that is working on sustainability. That is one of the criteria. You have to be a winery that's strongly dedicated to sustainability, and then a winery that has dedicated a lot of resources to hospitality. So, people say, well, what about Romane Conti? $25,000 a bottle of wine. Of course, that's an incredible vineyard and an incredible wine with all this history, but they don't have hospitality. You can't actually go to the winery. So that excludes some wineries. But, there's still a lot of really amazing wineries that host tourists or wine lovers. And our winery has a very robust program. And we now have a restaurant that Mary Orland, you didn't go to, that just got a Michelin mention.
Oh, that's great. The restaurant's called Angelica?
Yeah, Angelica Cocina Maestra, which means teacher kitchen, which refers to the fact that we are learning all the time, but also my grandmother Angelica was a teacher, and she's the sort of academic inspiration for our family to always be, working hard, studying hard, researching. And today we have these incredible tastings. You make your own blend. We have a wine and music pairing. We have a historical tasting. And then we have a distillery where we explain all the different kinds of products you can make with grapes. And we have this really fun visit at the winery that then ends with the restaurant, which it's actually very hard to get reservations. So I recommend to all our friends that you plan with a few months in advance, both for the restaurant and for the winery visit. So, all of this together led to our, being chosen. But the interesting thing is that, the organizers, they don't know either, because it's basically a group of 500 food, wine, and travel writers who vote. And whatever they vote is what ends up being ranked. So we ended up being voted number one, and I got the award in Spain, which was so fun to be in the old world. You know, I'm thinking, you know, my Italian great grandfather, you know, he leaves Italy where there's famine and poverty for the new world with the land of opportunity. And here we are getting an award in Spain. I don't think he could have ever imagined.
Yeah. How has things changed at the winery since you received this award? I mean, are the phones ringing off the hook or what?
Yes. There was a week where our staff was getting 2,000 emails per day.
Whoa.
Wow.
Can you imagine? And we have a system where you can log in and make reservations. And we are trying to automate some things, but we also want to always be able to get an answer. So sometimes we don't answer right away, and we beg forgiveness. We sometimes get a bad review because somebody didn't get an answer right away. But I have a rule that my staff is off Sunday and Monday. And that's a hard rule because I as a doctor, I think that people need to get their sleep. They need to spend time with their family. They need to be able to walk their dog and exercise. And if we're open every day, it'd be very hard to schedule. As a doctor, we were open every day, but that's different. I think if you're a winery, you can be closed a day or two. And so I beg forgiveness to our guests. If you weren't able to get a reservation, just plan in advance and otherwise come back a second time.
Well, I love it. And I also think that taking those 2 days off is an example of one of the ways in which you're taking care of your people. And that's really important at Catena. Can you talk to us about that, about ensuring, you know, I've heard you say that by taking care of your employees, you ensure that they will go on to teach some of this art to their children and so forth.
Absolutely. So we actually have many couples, siblings, you know, grandfather, father, granddaughter working at our winery. We have a lot of families. And, you know, it's at the core of sustainability that you take care of your people, because we have to take care of the environment. We have to take care of the vines. We have to take care of the ecosystem. We need to reduce carbon emissions, which we're doing now with the bottle weight initiative. But, you know, we really need to take care of our families, of our people. And, you know, one thing is just saying, okay, I'm going to do this for everybody because I want that. You know, I see that often in some human resources programs that I see, is that the owners will give people what they think they would want. And that, I mean, I disagree with that. I think you should ask people what they want and do that. And actually a great example of that is we have all these beautiful vineyards. You know, Mary, you've been to our vineyards. I mean,
Yes.
They're paradisiac locations with trees, and we actually give water to all our vineyard managers. They can have an orchard. They often have animals and horses for their kids and sheep. And, you know, we support them growing any food they want. We give them the seeds and anything they might need. Some people don't want it, but we have about half the people take the offer, which is free, and half the people don't. And that's okay. And we actually have 139 or 137 houses that we give to our staff to live in the vineyards. And it's you know, depending on what their job is. If they're working in a vineyard, they're more likely to get the house. But we also give some of the houses to people who work in the winery. Believe it or not everybody wants to live in the vineyard. Some people want to live in the town. But we asked these families what was important to them, and everybody wants transportation for the kids to go to school. And you know, we have at the core of our organization is education, because I really think that education is what lifts lives. We just had somebody from a tiny little village get his PhD working at the Catena Institute. And my mom, my dad, and I were at his PhD defense. It was like my child was graduating.
Oh, wow.
We were hanging out with him.
I saw that.
Oh
I saw
God,
that on Instagram. I love that.
It was amazing. Like with him and his parents and his daughter and his wife, and everybody was cheering. And then we had a party at the winery. Now we have two more people at the winery that want to do PhDs, which I'm thrilled. Which actually is a pretty big investment from our side, because we have to give them the time. It's rather costly to have somebody do a PhD, but you know, it's a win-win. But anyhow, we asked the families in the vineyards what they wanted. And you know, I thought they should want to grow their own food, right? And that was basically a half and half. What they really wanted was great internet. And, my dad always says like, oh, we don't need internet in the country. It's so nice to not have the internet. And I say, yeah, Dad, that's what you want because you're plugged all week. And when you go to the vineyard, you want to be unplugged, but they live there.
Right.
And you can't give a child an education without the internet these days. They need the internet to do their homework. So we actually spend a ton of money to put internet towers in all our vineyards. And for me, I didn't even have to think about it, and I didn't watch how much money we spend because, the people who don't watch their money go bankrupt. But I realized that this was what people wanted. And if I was saying that education was important, we should do this. And now we actually have the Elon Musk internet, the one that is from the satellites, which with this new government that we have, they've liberalized the internet. And so there's all these new opportunities for internet in remote areas, which I'm thrilled because the cost has gone down. But anyhow, that's an example of, really figuring out what do people want and what makes them happy and doing that.
That is so great. And as you said, taking care of your people is such an important part of sustainability. So let's talk about some other aspects where Catena Zapata, your family, your team is working on addressing climate change. I know that your father's decision to plant at higher altitudes has certainly become something that other wineries are now imitating because of the rising temperatures. And so talk about that, and also what goes into making lighter weight bottles and the impact that has.
Yeah, so the high altitude story is really interesting because my father was actually looking for more elegance in the wines. And so we already had some high altitude vineyards, but he wanted to, push the limit of vine cultivation. So he went to a place at 5,000 feet elevation where there were no vineyards because nobody thought the vines would ripen. And he said, this is where I'm going to plant my vines. And that's today the Adriana vineyard, which was planted in the early 90s, which is, the vineyard with more 100 points than any other vineyard in South America. So this progression to the higher altitudes initially was more related to a kind of wine my father wanted to make that was age-worthy, collectible. And then it became a model for climate change, and other parts of the world are moving to higher altitudes. We also found that the greater sunlight intensity increased the tannins in the grape skins because the vine is protecting the seed from too much sun. And so the skins are thicker. It's a biological phenomenon. So that's pretty cool as well. And the other interesting thing is that the average temperature is not really getting warmer in these mountain regions. And that's a known phenomenon that some mountain regions are not seeing warming. Now, our big problem is water. We have water in the glaciers in the Andes, and that water is decreasing because it's being used, for farming by cities and because of climate change. And so we have vineyards in many other locations as a preparation for not being able to plant more vineyards in Mendoza. So that we definitely have a climate change issue, but it's a little different than in other places. And high altitude is definitely a solution. In terms of the bottle weight, we actually had this whole plan prepared for 2020. And then there was a pandemic, and there was a glass oven in Argentina that had a problem. So we couldn't do anything. But the minute the pandemic was over, we started planning again this initiative, which is basically reducing our bottle weight between 20-something and 40-something for some of our most sold wines. And so our average bottle weight has gone down about 40% in the last 12 years or so. And then we recently made this very dramatic change to these new bottles for our Catena high mountain vines, which is, our wine that most people know. We have a Malbec, a Cabernet, a Chardonnay. We also have a brand called Catena Appellations. So we've made this big change. But one of the things that I was realizing was that a lot of the wine trade, wine journalists talk a lot about bottle weight. But then when you go to consumers, I talk to my friends who drink really good wine. I have a lot of friends who like good wine. They had no idea. And if I showed them two bottles and one was heavier and bigger, they would often assume it was a more expensive wine. And
exactly, for sure.
That's still, if you go to any wine store, you're going to see that a lot of the more expensive wines are in heavier bottles. And so what I realized was that we needed to tell the consumer, and, consumers are not reading wine magazine articles, maybe a few are, like the real, fanatics of wine, but most people who drink wine are not reading wine magazines, cover to cover. So what I thought was, hey, I know more people in my day-to-day, and my distributors and the salespeople who sell Catena, the people that come to our winery, than a single journalist can contact through one article. So I thought, let's do a campaign. And we developed this QR code with questions about climate change. So I'm going to ask you guys, do you know what's like the percentage of carbon emissions from wine that can be attributed to the bottle, to the glass? Just throw a number.
No. All right, I don't know.
Throw a number.
Is it like 60%?
Yeah, so up to 60%. Yeah, so actually you would have answered the question correctly. It can be 40% in some places. And in Argentina, we make our own glass. So that's a huge advantage. Or it comes from Chile, which is right next to Mendoza. So we're in a position to change a lot just by lowering bottle weight. Now, it's not one-to-one. Like if you lower your bottle weight by 40%, the carbon emissions might go down by just 20, because you can't fit twice as many bottles in a ship or in a truck. So True. It's not always, one-to-one. But really, the most important intervention, more important than, turning the lights off and, using electric vehicles, is actually lowering the bottle weight. Now, the interesting thing to me is that, if I'm trying to be sustainable, what I'm trying to do is sell wine that's not a commodity, fine wine, special wines that come from special places, wine that's age-worthy, that's a little more expensive. If I'm selling bulk wine, I'm not feeding a lot of people here in Argentina. So if I lower the bottle weight and people think the wine's less expensive and I sell less of my really fine wine, then that's not very sustainable either. So that's why I decided to, do this campaign. And I'm telling all my friends who are producers, like, hey, let's all get together and tell people about this. And I still have some heavy bottles. Like our heaviest bottles used to be, 1,100 grams, which is really high. We're trying to get to, 420. It's less than half. So I still have bottles that are in around 700 plus, which is what I consider heavy, but they're so beautiful. And I feel that when I really convince the consumers to go down in bottle weight and everybody else in the industry goes down, then it's going to be very easy for us to go down on the higher end.
Absolutely. It's going to take an industry-wide effort.
Exactly.
Because you can't do it alone.
But you know what? I have a lot of hope because the suitcase people did it. And this is the big example. Remember, even 10 years ago, most suitcases were heavy. And then today, the fanciest suitcases are the lightest. Nobody wants a heavy suitcase. So I think we can do this, but we just need to all get together. And then, really fancy wine people need to lower their bottle weight. And actually, it's very cool that Burgundy, that probably the most expensive wines in the world right now are coming from Burgundy in France. They're using lightweight bottles. So that's very encouraging.
Well, and I think it's especially cool that, Argentina is not a huge country and, this should be happening in California. I love the fact that Catena Zapata is saying like, hey, let's make a change and everybody listen up. This is important for the whole world.
I mean, there are people in California, like Kendall Jackson has talked a lot about it. There's Tavlos Creek. So there is talk about it, but to me, it has to become one of those things where you do a wine tasting, you talk about this. It's a requirement. You're going to talk about it at some point. And, then if 10 wineries do it and you're doing, 100 events, that's 1,000, events that had it. And it needs to get this kind of viralization effect. And there's a lot of people in Europe talking about it, but we need more. I agree. We need more. We need it happening everywhere.
All right. Another topic I want to get to, biodiversity in wine and protecting old vines and why it's important, not just for the lore or history, but there's actually, you have actual science behind why we need to be doing more of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is part of climate change solutions. So I think that, a lot of people know about maybe, fruits and vegetables, people who buy heirloom tomatoes or, there are movements in the food industry to say, I don't need all my tomatoes to look the same. But I mean, I have to say, I love those little boxes of cherry tomatoes that they all look the same. However, and because they're so tasty and sweet, but we have done something very bad, us people. I mean, we've done so many bad things. We are destroying our planet. But I think what I see that's so wonderful is that, I mean, everybody wants to reverse things. Everybody wants to help our planet. And that's wonderful. And most people I find just want to be told, what can I do? How can I help? And so, what I tell people is, listen, don't always choose, okay, choose that little perfect box of tomatoes, but, also buy some heirloom tomatoes and, I don't know, talk about it to people. We need to preserve this genetic diversity. And in most of the world, you have genetic sort of museums. So there's these big state museums where they keep, every single variety of tomato there ever was, every single kind of corn, but mostly what's farmed is of a few kinds. Now, viticulture and wine is in a very privileged position in that we have all these different wine varieties. I mean, we have a lot more diversity in wine than they have in apples and bananas, like citrus is mostly one kind, so we have all this diversity already just in the varieties. But within one variety, there's a lot more diversity in Argentina than in the old world. And this is something that people don't know. There's a French scientist that basically told me, I think the new world is going to save the old world when it comes to biodiversity. Because what happened is that there was this movement for the clones. And when I say the new world, I actually don't include the US because the US is mostly planted with clones. So a clone is an individual. It's like Mary Orlin is one clone, right? Laura Catena is one clone. Now, the audience listening to this, let's say it's, 500 people, they're a population, right? And we're all a population together. Now, let's say that you decide that you only want people with initials MO to be reproduced. Mary Orlin. So then you have a whole vineyard just planted with Mary Orlins, and you get rid of everybody, Laura Catena, Mary Babbitt, our whole audience. You just do Mary Orlins. That's what's happened to vines in Europe. And this was a post-phylloxera, and even after phylloxera, people said, let's just save the best vines. And there became all these famous clones, like the Dijon clones from Burgundy, and, 7 and what's called the Margaux clone. And, they're all these clones are at UC Davis. And some varieties have lots of clones and some have few. Like Cabernet Sauvignon has a real problem. There's very little genetic diversity. But we have a lot of genetic diversity for Cabernet Sauvignon in Salta, in the north of Argentina, and in Mendoza. So what I realized was that in Argentina, we actually had what in other countries is in a museum type place, like in a research institute. Like in France, they have for Malbec, they have a selection of 500 individual plants that are all different in cohorts. In Argentina, we have thousands, but they're out in the open. We don't even have them identified. It's like you had the Louvre Museum, but out there in the vineyard, all different. So every vine in our vineyards is what we call masal. The vineyards are different. Now, you might have repetitions of one because basically the vineyard was planted by taking cuttings from another vineyard. Vineyards are planted by taking a cutting, like you take a little branch of one vine, you put it in a little pot, and that's a new vine. You don't use seeds, because if you're using seeds, you would get a different variety. If you want to plant the same variety, you plant a cutting. So in Argentina, these vineyards are all genetically diverse. It's like us plus all the audience, the 500 people, and that's like reproducing all the vineyards, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands. Now, what I'm working on is cataloging those, and we have 135 different cuttings that we plant in all our vineyards, and we also plant these genetically diverse populations in all our vineyards. And I'm trying to work with producers of old vines who are thinking of replanting to preserve their selections, because once that gets pulled out, it's gone. And there was actually a really cool article in the New York Times yesterday that was talking about animals that, there's some species that there's only, less than 100 left in one little place. So they're having all these debates about, God, how do we preserve this? Do we do CRISPR, that genetic technology that's come out, or do we do crossbreeding to at least keep some of that population alive? And today, and the final question of that article is, we don't want to regret in 20 years, we won't be able to do it. And today we're in that kind of similar situation that Argentina has all this diversity, but it's at risk of loss because at some point vineyards do have to be replanted. So there's two ways to preserve that. One of them is to just keep these old vineyards going, even if they're producing less, which I believe in. I think I want to retire a person that's doing beautiful work just because they're doing a little less of it or slower, especially if I could make up the money difference. And I think that in wine, if you make a wine that's, significantly better, people will pay for that difference. And I think you can do that with old wines. So I think
absolutely, old vines have such a different characteristic. The fruit is so different than a much younger vine.
Exactly. So to me, it's like you need to get your act together, preserve that old vineyard, tell the consumer, work really hard, open bottles, and you're going to be able to preserve that old vineyard. So that's one. But the other thing that's important about these old vineyards in Argentina, in particular, because if you go to an old vineyard in other parts of the world, they are clonal mostly. So the genetic diversity preservation imperative is not there for that vineyard. It's just preserving a beautiful vineyard, which is also worthy. But in Argentina, if that population gets pulled out and it gets replanted with a single clone or not with a population or with a different population, then you've just lost all that genetic diversity, which is what's happening to animals out there, to amphibians. So if we could right now, preserve all this, and we actually have 2 vineyards where we're preserving vineyards that are getting pulled out, sometimes vineyards that are not getting pulled out, but we have like a whole copy of a vineyard in a experimental vineyard to study the selections. So I think that really in Argentina, we have something that is like, the largest open air museum of genetic diversity for vines. And that's something that I want the world to care about so that people in Argentina think twice before pulling out an old vineyard.
Love that.
I do too. Now we'll switch to another topic because, your time is valuable, and I know we don't have you for too much longer, but Laura, some of our listeners may know that last year, the World Health Organization came out with a statement that there is no safe level of alcohol to consume by anyone. Yeah. And other countries, Canada has just come out with a recommendation for only 2 drinks per week, whether you're male or female. Ireland will be putting warning labels for cancer and liver damage on their bottles starting in 2026. So there's been so much written about the dangers of alcohol and health, or the impact on your health, but you have been speaking out lately. You have a different opinion, or you have something to say. How do you respond to this?
Yeah. So first of all, you might not know this, but there's actually regulation in the US that's different from Europe or Argentina, that as a producer of any kind of alcohol, you're not allowed to say to people, hey, this is good for your health. You're not allowed to put it on the package. You're not allowed to tell people during a wine tasting. You're not allowed to have a QR code or your website that talks about alcohol or wine and health. So when I talk about this, I'm basically exerting my First Amendment right to speak of the science. I'm not telling people, hey, go drink wine for your health. You can make your own decision based on the science. So I try to stay out of, why the WHO is doing this. I think that mostly, but I'll give you my opinion. They're mostly worried that there's a lot of heavy drinking and they want to reduce that. And
sure,
they want to basically vilify all drinking because they think it's an easier strategy. It's a simpler message. However, the science is very clear. There's been hundreds of studies that are observational studies. So these are not as good as what's called a randomized controlled study, which is the study that they do for drugs. Like when you put a new medication, you say, you're going to take a placebo, you're going to take Tylenol, and then let's see whose pain gets better. And then, if the ones that took the Tylenol as opposed to the placebo, they had a reduction in pain, they say, okay, this drug works. So we haven't had that. But what they do is they look at big population databases and they match, two people. So they follow people for, decades often, and they match two people and they say, okay, this woman, she has diabetes, and she's a certain weight and she doesn't have other medical problems and she's a certain age. We're going to match her with this other woman that also has diabetes and similar weight and, doesn't have other health problems. And so they basically do a pretty good job of generating a result. And that data has shown that, people who drink alcohol in moderation, and the defined moderation is, up to 1 glass of wine, 5 ounce of 12%. So it'd probably be a little less than 5 ounces if you're having a 13% wine, and 2 glasses for men. And the reason for the difference is that women produce less alcohol dehydrogenase. And so women can drink less alcohol. If you drink as much as a man, your level is going to go higher. So that's why the women is in general. Again, every person's a little different. But what they've shown is that people who drink in moderation, have reduced mortality and better cardiovascular health. And when I say cardiovascular health, it means, less heart attacks, less embolic, the blocking kind of strokes, than people who don't drink. Now, if you drink more than that, and generally, let's say I have friends who work in the industry that think it's okay to drink a whole bottle of wine per day. That is not good for you. That can increase your cardiovascular risk. It can increase strokes, bleeding strokes. It can increase risk of certain cancers. And so I think that what's important in this whole discussion is if you're able to drink, the way people in these blue zones, the blue zones are where people live really long and they study those regions. Most people in those places drink alcohol in moderation. And it probably helps them because it makes them happier. They're hanging out with their friends. They have the blood thinner. And so the mechanism for the cardiovascular benefit is that alcohol acts as a blood thinner, kind of like an aspirin. And also it increases HDL, which is the good cholesterol. And that's been well demonstrated. There's no doubt about that. So if you're able to drink in moderation with food, and when you drink with food, the level is less high. So the toxic effects of alcohol are when the level goes really high. So anything you can do to have the level not go as high, so drink slowly, drink with food, drink water at the same time, that's all good. But if you're not able to control how much you drink, you should definitely stop drinking. I say this to everybody I know. And so I think that what's important in this whole discussion is to be aware that the potential benefits are only for a low amount of drinking. And there's some, if you're taking certain medications, if you're pregnant, there's some medical conditions that require that you not drink at all. And so you really, in the end, don't listen to anything I just said. Talk to your doctor and ask them, hey, am I one of those people that can continue to drink what I'm drinking? I'm drinking whatever, 1 glass 3 days a week. Do you think it's okay? You should ask your doctor. And, they're going to look at your whole medical history and they're going to say, yeah, go ahead. Or, they might say, no, for XYZ reason, you have some medical problem, you shouldn't be drinking. So that's my long answer to the question.
But really clear, and coming from a physician, I feel like you boiled that down for us in a really clear and helpful way. So thank you for that. We know you have a time limit, so we're going to let you go. I have to ask as we say goodbye, though, every time I see you, you have on a darling beret, and we'd like to know the story behind the beret for you. You're easy to recognize at wine events because of it, but beyond that.
So the gauchos, who are the cowboys in Argentina, actually the male cowboys, they wear these berets because they're good for the sun, they're comfortable, and they wear them when they're horseback riding, and it's part of the traditional outfit of the gauchos. And the truth is that I once was having a really bad hair day, which is very common for me, and I had to go somewhere, so I just grabbed one of these berets, which I've always worn. I like traditional clothing, and I used to actually dress like a gaucho, like just to be in the countryside. The outfits are really comfortable, the boots and the pants also for horseback riding. So I would often wear this as just like my normal attire. But one time I had a bad hair day, I wore this beret and everybody loved it. And then I said, oh my God, I've got the solution for a bad hair day, the beret. And then I started wearing it. And now, people don't recognize me if I don't wear it. And so I wear the beret. I don't have to go to the hairdresser, which I have nothing against hairdressers, but I'm a very impatient person. I cannot sit in that chair for an hour. And so that's their solution. But now, as you said, it's become my trademark and I'm kind of stuck with it, but I'm grateful that I don't have to do much with my hair.
I love that. Everybody needs a bad hair day solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Laura Catena, it is so great to talk with you again. And I must say, it is so easy to recommend your wine because it is so consistently great. Every bottle I've ever tasted is great. And beyond that, though, you guys are working so hard to be good stewards of the land and just good people. So it's fun to recommend Catena.
Oh, thank you very much, you guys, and have an amazing day. And come and see us in Argentina.
I would love to return. And Mary Babbitt, you need to go.
I do. Okay. Thank you, Laura. You run off because you've got another appointment. And thanks for making time for us today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Laura. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, Laura. Sip, sip, hooray.
Well, Mary Babbitt, wow, I am just in awe of Laura Catena and her energy and everything she's working on. I know she's got a great team, but she is tireless.
She sure is. And that whole the scientist part of her personality and her background really lends itself to, as we were talking about, just the future of sustainability in winemaking. And I love that that's a passion of hers.
Great. Well, one thing we didn't have time to get into because there was so much to discuss is Laura and her team were very generous to send us a few wines to try. And there were two Malbec based rosés. One was a blend with Malbec, Syrah, Grenache, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chenin. So kind of a blend of red and white grapes to make this really light, fun, easy sipping they call it the Catena Rosé 2023 de la Provincia de Mendoza. Then we also got to try the Catena Rosé of Malbec, 100% Malbec. And, you know, it had a little bit more texture and body and was very floral and beautiful.
I was able to share those wines with some girlfriends out on the patio. So that was really a fun, we enjoyed that.
That's awesome. And then a wine I really enjoyed is the Catena Vista Flores Malbec. This is the 2021 vintage. And we were talking about their efforts on reducing bottle weight. And so this is the first of their really lighter bottles that Laura referred to. And I can really tell a difference. You know, some heavy bottles, it's enough to be able to use as a dumbbell.
Mm-hmm.
But when you pick this up next to even the next wine we'll mention, there's a clear difference in how heavy or how light the bottle is.
Yeah, and it's fun to now know that that represents quality and care for the environment. It's not an indicator of, of a lower quality wine in the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
I have to make a quick mention of one of the best wines I've ever tasted, which is the Catena Zapata Malbec Argentino. It is a beautiful bottle with an incredible label that really tells the story of Malbec and phylloxera. It's got everything on the label. It's really beautiful, but the wine is gorgeous. So it's a lovely wine and it's one of their higher end wines, but goodness gracious, what a treat to taste this. So if you're ever looking for a great wine to gift, Catena Zapata Malbec Argentino, just off the charts great.
And we will list all of these wines on our show notes on our website, sipsiphooraypodcast.com.
As always, we thank you for listening to Sip Sip Hooray, and we urge you to share our podcast with your friends, give us a rating, and stay in touch with us. Let us know how we're doing, and sharing it with your friends really helps other people find Sip Sip Hooray.
Right. And you can also subscribe to our podcast on whatever podcast platform you listen to, so you can get our episodes automatically put into your playlist. Also, we have a Substack where we will list all of the information and link to the shows. We also include some extra goodies. So if you go to Substack and subscribe to Sip Sip Hooray podcast, you'll get an email when our new episodes drop. You'll also get updates on some fun stories that we will put in there. And that's only for our Substack subscribers, but subscribing is free. So why not?
Why not indeed? That's going to do it for this episode. We thank you again for listening. We encourage you to follow Dr. Catena's advice and drink in moderation what is healthy for you. And start by talking with your doctor about that question.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And wine can be a great part of your life, but it has to be in moderation and balance.
All right, Mary Orlin. Well, cheers to you, friend, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, cheers to you and to all our listeners. Sip, sip, hooray.
Sip, sip, hooray.